So, the Calydonian Boar, a ferocious wild beast able to trample the warrior to bloody rags beneath its razor hooves. The boar is the handiwork of Artemis, goddess of the moon, who created it using mud from the river of tears, where the strong wind carries the shrieks of the tormented and hungry vultures hover like gulls. Artemis's monster ravages the land, carrying out the vain goddess's evil plan to randomly destroy mortal after mortal after mortal. Meanwhile, a small child, soon to be Artemis's main rival in strength and beauty, is being raised in the hills by a family of boars. The wild child, Atalanta, grows into a mighty huntress who staunchly defends her family at any price. When one of her brothers is killed, Meleager, heir to the throne of Calydon, she becomes immersed in a complicated struggle for love and power that involves not only Meleager and herself, but also the king and queen of Calydon, the queen's two idiot brothers, a murderous band of outlaws, and the ferocious Simba hound that becomes Meleager's ally and best friend. But at the center of it all stands the Calydonian Boar, the most dangerous and threatening beast in the land. The tale of the Calydonian Boar takes place in a world where no one is safe from impending evil, but it is also a world in which friendships grow and hope triumphs as a huntress and her prince bravely battle against gods and beasts in order to protect their blossoming love. So, Chapter 1, The Birth of the Boar. March wind whistled through the trees. Pine needles clashed softly. Epaulets of snow were melting off the high shoulders of Olympus. But in the garden of the gods it was always May. The air was scented with summer flowers, cooled by the rumor of snow. The gods had dined and were lounging about, gossiping. The talk turned to sport and how they had entertained themselves during the winter, tormenting humankind. This led to discussion of monsters. Now the gods and goddesses began boasting furiously. Some time before, Zeus, alarmed by the shrinkage of his human herds, had passed a law limiting each god to a kill bag of 6 humans a month. That seems reasonable. But the High Ones had found a way to evade this law. They employed monsters. Poseidon bragged of a sea serpent that could flail a fishing fleet to splinters in the space of an hour and devour all the crews. Hera spoke smugly of a 3-bodied giant, Geryon, and of the 100-headed Hydra, whom it was useless to decapitate, for every head cut off, 2 sprang back in its place. Athena spoke of the once lovely sea nymph Medusa, whose hair had turned to living snakes, making her into a sight so frightful that anyone looking at her turned to stone. Hades, who was on one of his rare visits to the upper world, told of his hell hags, the brass-winged, brass-clawed harpies, and of Cerberus, the 3-headed dog who guarded the gates of the land beyond death. Apollo, the sun god, who had been listening quietly, noticed that his twin sister Artemis, goddess of the moon, was growing sullen. "What's the matter with you?" he murmured. Come away with me," she whispered, and led him off among the roses. "I can't stand those old braggarts," she cried. "It's disgusting when they begin yammering about their dreadful pets." "I know what's really bothering you, sister," said Apollo, who understood his sister perfectly. "You're angry because you have no monster of your own. And since you're so understanding of my needs, dear brother, give me some advice. What shall I do?" "Well, obviously, there's only one thing to do. Get yourself a monster of your very own. One preferably with a cell phone tucked in its pocket." "The trouble is twofold, Apollo. 1, cell phones have not been invented yet. And 2, I loathe and despise the creatures I've been hearing about. I love animals, as you know, the beasts of the forest, the birds of the air, hawk and hummingbird, stag and wolf. I love some for fleetness, others for ferocity, and all for grace and strength, for the natural beauty, in fact. But these slithery sea serpents and fire-breathing dragons, these 100-headed reptiles and 3-bodied giants, oh, no, not for me. Too freakish, too ugly." "You're hard to please, sister mine." "Always have been." "Well, if you don't fancy any of the huge assortment of monsters now available, then you must make your own monster." "Make my own? How do I do that?" "Oh, you must ask someone more bloodthirsty than I. I am a god of music and medicine, you know. and I must preserve my reputation for gentleness. Artemis smiled to herself, for she knew how savage her radiant brother could become when angered. She also knew that he would give her no more advice that day, and wandered away from him. She passed near Ares, who was sucking the marrow out of 2 beef bones at once. The bones sticking out of his mouth looked like tusks, and these tusks, taken together with his gross snout and poisonous little red eyes, made him look like a wild boar. Artemis drifted up to him and said, "Greetings, kinsman. Have you ever happened to make a monster?"
I don't need monsters to do my killing for me, growled the god of war.
Well, why not? Are you exempt from the game laws?
Game laws? No. As the eldest son of our king, excuse me, as the eldest son of our king, it behooves me to obey his edicts, and I do dutifully limit my personal kills to 6 per month.
Do you? Do you really?
Murmured Artemis.
But you are famous for your foul temper and are surely moved to rage by more than 6 humans per month.
Oh, yes, Moon. By more than 6 or 60 for that matter. What I do then is simply start a war in the right place. I fan the hot ashes of hatred that reside in the human heart. I fan those cinders into flame, either against neighbors or against another tribe, for normal men entertain both kinds of hatred. And when the flame grows huge and red hot, it is called war. I then take care to move those who have offended me into the worst part of the battle, and lo, those who have angered me, yes, there are many who have angered me, those who have angered me are killed, and I am technically innocent of their death, aren't I?
Well, thank you for your courteous explanation, Lord of the Battles.
Nevertheless, said Ares, I have observed your uncle Hades making monsters when he needed to restaff hell. Yes. What Hades does is take up a handful of vital mud and mold it into any form that he desires.
Oh, and where does he get this vital mud?
From the river Styx, of course, which borders his dread realm and is also known as the River of Tears. Over it vultures hover like gulls, and the winds that blow from shore to shore carry the stench of the roasting pits, the demonic laughter of the torture crews, and the shrieks of the tormented. Oh, quite an outfit he's got going there. These odors and these sounds sink to the bottom of the River of Tears. Yes, sir. And they invest the mud there at the bottom of the river with a vicious potence, and very good for the making of monsters.
Yeah. Thank you again, War,
said Artemis, and drifted away,
thinking hard.
The moon chariot driven by Artemis was wrought of silver. Of silver also were the horns and hooves of the 6 white stags that drew the chariots across the sky, and their eyes were amber. Upon this rainy night, however, the moon was hidden. The goddess rode behind cloud cover. Down to earth came the silver chariot. All across the meadow and plain it flashed, and through the deep valleys, until it reached a chasm called Avernus, which was a gateway to the land beyond death. Here Artemis untethered her stags and let them graze upon the plain. She made herself invisible then, and entered Avernus. Now the chasm was really a chain of interlocking caves plunging toward the center of the earth. Down, down the goddess sped, troubling bats. Even invisible, she cast a faint radiance upon the rock walls as she passed. The caves ended in a rocky plain that stretched into the darkness. But a river-smelling wind cut through the sulphurous murk. Borne upon the wind also were the curious, yearning, hopeless cries uttered only by ghosts. Ghosts, ghosts. 77 days to Halloween. Sorry. Artemis followed the sound to the shore of a river, which she knew must be the Styx. She heard a strange thwacking sound and saw an enormous creature driving a flock of something before him. White things they were, seeming now like clouds, now like sheep, now like spouts of steam. And she realized that they were today's crop of the dead, half vaporized, flesh still clinging to their bones, memories half alive in their hearts. She also realized that the one herding them must be Charon, the dread ferryman. Don't pay the ferryman, who would take them across the river Styx
and through the gates of hell. Charon was a giant. His arms were as big as tree trunks. His hands were so broad that he needed no oars to row his heavy boat across the Styx. He simply reached into the water and rowed with his hands. Now, however, he was using those hands cruelly as he drove the whimpering shades toward the dock. Snarling and growling, he swung his tree trunk arms, beating his flock toward the moored boat. His hard hands smacking the ghost sounded like 100 fishwives softening the bodies of newly caught squid by beating them against the rocks. It was one of the saddest sights on earth, or beneath it, really. But the moon goddess, watching, was no more moved than we are watching cattle graze on their way to becoming beefsteaks. She waited until Charon had driven the last of the shades across the pier and into the ferry, and watched him dip his enormous hands into the water and begin to row. She watched the boat dwindle and vanish, and then she walked along the shore, searching for a shallow place. For she did not wish to enter the black water. She needed a place where the shore shelved gradually so that she might kneel upon dry land and dip her hands into the water. She did finally find such a place. She reached into the river, and she took a double handful of the mud. The water was black, but the mud was a curious reddish brown and was warm to the touch, seeming to pulse faintly as she watched it. She knew that whatever she molded would become terribly alive in her hands. She began to shape the mud, working furiously, dipping into the river for more mud, pulling out great gobs of it as the wild beast took form in her hands. Wolf, bear, panther, each one of its perfect of its kind, but 3 times the normal size. She set them on the riverbank to study them. Although she had not yet breathed final life into her creations, the magic mud had transplanted itself instantly into muscle, sinew, hot blood. The forms waited only for her to awaken them into full and throbbing life. She couldn't decide which one to keep. They all looked beautiful to her. Well, I only need one monster, she said to herself. And each of these magnificent creatures, these magnificent, fierce creatures, could serve as my instrument of vengeance when needed. Let's see, then. Which of these do I prefer? Shall it be the bear? Oh, he's wonderfully big, but bears are sleepy in winter. My beast must be able to serve me the year round. How about the wolf? He's superb, would be fully alert in all seasons, especially October. Oh, but wait. Wolves hunt deer, very successfully. A wolf this size might decide to devour the silver-horned stags that draw my moon chariots. Now I can't have that. So it would have to be the panther. Well, on the other hand, the great cats are even more frantic for live meat than are the wolves, and the deer family is their favorite prey. No, none of these will do. Back to the mud they must go. What I need... Artemis pondered and mused. What I need is a beast, as fierce as these, as powerful, but one that will kill only people. I'm thinking Kira would approve of that too. Is there such a beast I can create? And suddenly, the snouted, red-eyed face of Ares gnawing beef bones floated before her, and she laughed with joy. Oh, yes, of course. A wild boar. It can pierce armor with its long, sharp tusk, trample a warrior to bloody rags beneath its razor hooves, and the only animals it kills are hunting dogs that bring it to bay. She pointed her hands at panther, bear, and bull. They lost shape, became mud, a heap of steaming mud on the riverbank. Artemis dug her hands into it and began to work again. She made an enormous wild boar with tusks like ivory spears and hooves like hatchets. She stood in the bank of the river Styx, admiring it. Well, oh yes, now that I have made this magnificent thing, what shall I do with it? I'm not yet angry enough at anyone to need an instrument of vengeance. I know. I'll set it down in Africa, there among the lions and apes and crocodiles. It will learn to fight to be ready with its deadly skills when I need them. And so she pried open the jaws of the great boar, and she breathed into it. The mud quickened with life. Its red eyes rolled. The goddess leaped onto its back and began to ride it like a horse, urging it into a terrific short-legged gallop, making it go faster and faster, for she was weary of Hades' realm and the wild eagerness to get back into a drench of sunlight, to breathe the air that smelled not of basted sin and ashy tear, but of sea and grass. Chapter 2. Springtime in Arcadia. Trees were budding, birds singing, flowers opening, cows were calving, sheep were lambing. It was a happy time. Earth and sea rejoiced in the kindling sky. But all this fertility made King 𝘄𝕖𝕍 very uneasy. He summoned his wife and said, "If it, my darling, it, if you intend to get pregnant again, my dear, my love, my star, if you intend to get pregnant again, try to produce a son for a change, won't you?" "Why, darling," said the queen, "you do have something to do with my pregnancies, you know. And why are you belittling our daughters? They're lovely girls."
"Oh, yes, darling, my love, my son, my worship, my yes, daughters are all right. They can be delightful, in fact, but 5 of them in a row is overdoing it a bit, don't you think? I'll need 5 large dowries to marry them off to decently powerful princes, and my treasury simply can't stand the strain. What we need this time is a son who will grow up to be a mighty warrior.
And help me invade a few neighbors, so we may refill our coffers. You see, I'm counting on you, my queen, my love, my star, my sky, I'm counting on you. Don't let me down." He was speaking gently, which made the queen shudder. She knew that her husband was never more dangerous than when he was pretending to be gentle. But she concealed her fear. She smiled sweetly and promised to do her best to bear a son. "Oh, woe," she said to herself when the king had left. "I already feel myself with child again, and I know that it will be another girl. Oh, I don't know how I know, but I know. I also know that he won't keep this one. He'll give her to the mountain and break my heart." You see, for in those days, those wicked, wicked days, people who did not want their children would take them up the mountain above the tree line and abandon them there, because death by freezing was painless, and these parents could pride themselves on taking a lot of extra trouble to spare their child unnecessary suffering. And to further soften their abominable act, they refused to call it by its right name of infanticide or child murder. They said they were giving the child to the mountain. Now, Queen Clymene, however, was very maternal, and she resolved that no child of hers would be left to die. She thought and thought, and puzzled until her puzzler was sore. And then finally she hit upon a plan. "I know what I'll do. I know just what I'll do," she said to herself. "I'll imitate the goddess Rhea, whose husband Kronos was devouring her children as fast as she bore them. When her final child Zeus was conceived, she concealed her condition until she could conceal it no longer, and only then did she inform her husband that she was with child again. And then she bore it secretly, 3 months before it was expected, smuggled it out of the palace and gave it to the mountain nymphs to raise. Then wrapped a stone in swaddling clothes and gave it to her husband, who swallowed it and suffered a major bellyache. Well, I'll do the same thing. I know a pair of kindly, reliable shepherds who will raise the child as their own, especially as I shall pay them well. As for defying my husband this way, well, I'd do that 100 times over to save this daughter whom I already love. But what's good enough for the goddess is good enough for me." And so Queen Clymene kept her secret. The child ripened within her for 3 months. Only then did she tell her husband that was happening. He frowned and reported his demand for a son, and she promised to do her best. 6 months later, she gave birth to a girl, a sweet, darling little girl whom she named Atalanta, and bade a faithful servant to take the baby out of the castle and deliver her to the shepherd family. She also sent certain instructions to the shepherds, and a fat bag of gold to boot, and then she told her husband that she had miscarried. But as happened to so many parents since, her anxiety for the welfare of her baby was what brought great trouble to the child, for she had overpaid the shepherds. The husband drank himself foolish one night and bragged about his new wealth. No one quite believed him, but the story spread and reached the ears of an outlaw band who didn't believe the rumor either, but checked it out anyway. Robbery was their trade, and they were very professional. They caught the shepherd as he was pasturing his sheep. Hello, Violet. Built a small fire of twigs and grilled the soles of his feet until he told them where the gold was hidden. After that, they killed him, of course. They went to his cottage, collected the gold, and the new widow vanished into the hills, which left the child, Atalanta, who awoke in the empty cottage and immediately began to call for food. Although only a few months old, she had a loud and bawling voice, which grew louder when no one answered. She cried herself to sleep, finally, and woke hungrier than ever and began to howl again. And still, no one came. And so poor little darling and loud Atalanta swung herself out of her cradle and fell to the floor with a loud thump. And she had a sturdy, rubbery little body and was unhurt by the fall. She started to crawl, for she could not walk yet, and the cottage had only 2 rooms. She searched both of them, and she knew that she was alone. So she crawled outside. It was a cloudless morning. The grass was warm. The air smelled of sunlight and pine needles and distant snow. She rolled in the grass, gurgling happily. She ate some grass and spat it out. She ate a handful of dirt and a few ants, and was not well pleased. She craved milk and barley mush. She crawled off to find them. The eastern slope of a mountain gets the morning sun, but cools off quickly in the late afternoon, and this naked little baby, still searching for food, was stabbed by a cold wind. She wedged herself in the cleft of a rock that still held heat. She was miserable, and hungry, and miserable, and hungry. Bushes loomed and seemed to grow as she watched them. Hunger clawed her belly. She howled into the blue shadows. Her cries attracted the attention of a she-bear that was searching the slope for a lost cub. The huge, blunt-headed, shaggy beast came nosing up to the squalling baby. She didn't know what it was, but it was alive and young and, oh, so very edible. She came closer. Atalanta felt a great and vital warmth. She smelled milk. Her hands reached out and grabbed the fur. She swung herself up under the bear and began to nuzzle for milk. The she-bear, amazed, felt a tiny mouth upon her. She was shocked by its toothlessness, but she knew the sweet easement of milk being drawn from her swollen udders. Very gently, she took the baby in her jaws and began to climb the slope with her swaggering, shoulder-rolling walk. She hadn't found her cub, but this thing would do for the moment. Atalanta felt the great teeth upon her, but they seemed as gentle as the arms of a shepherdess. She was not afraid. She rode happily through the cold blue light, up the slope toward the bear's cave. Chapter 3, The Wild Child. Now, she-bears produce 1 or 2 cubs a year. They begin life as fluffy balls of fur, cute and playful as puppies. Within a year, however, they are half-grown, full-grown at 2. By the time the child Atalanta was 5 years old, she had wrestled with 5 different litters of her bear cubs and was as strong and fleet as a little wild animal herself. She loved to climb rocks, run full tilt down the hills, scrambling up the trees, ride the branches, race along the beach, and swim in the sea. The only one thing troubled Atalanta. Why was she so smooth-skinned while her brothers and sisters were so nice and furry? She was also different in her refusal to hibernate. When she was very small, she had no choice because the mother bear blocked the exit with her huge body. When Atalanta tried to squeeze past to the mouth of the cave, mother bear would simply swing a big paw in her sleep, knocking the child back inside. But by the time Atalanta was 5, she had learned to vanish into the woods at the first signs of cold weather and remain outside till spring. When she returned to her family, the mother bear, always irritable after hibernation, would cuff her a few times and roll her over on the ground and lick her tenderly to show that she still loved her hairless little Atalanta, even though she was too wicked to spend the winter sleeping in a cave as all proper bears do. Atalanta wondered about being so different. It puzzled her mightily. If she wasn't quite a bear, then what was she? She sought the answer in other animals. Deer looked smooth, but only in closer inspection she found that they too had fur, short fur, but fur nonetheless. Worms were smooth, but she didn't relish the idea of being related to worms. Besides, worms, caterpillars, for instance, were quite furry. She came upon a python one day, and she watched him engorge a young doe and fell asleep while digesting it. She went closer and fearlessly rummaged among the great snake's coils. It was quite smooth. On the other hand, it was very unlike her, legless as a worm, and she didn't like its feeding habits. So things were more of a puzzle than ever for poor little Atalanta. It was early autumn. The sun was still hot, and although the night winds had begun to show a sharp edge, Atalanta sat on a warm stone, dangling her legs into a stream, and gave the big question more thought. How else was she different besides her furlessness? Well, there was the matter of her slow growth. Young cubs that she could hold on her lap were wrestling with her on equal terms by the time of their first hibernation and were much larger than her by the end of a year. They'd become full-grown, powerful beasts by the end of 2 years, while she seemed to have hardly grown at all. Perhaps it was because of their habit of sleeping all winter in a cave. This year she might try it herself. And so, to the mother bear's delight, Atalanta did not vanish that winter, but entered the cave with the others and tried to fall asleep. But she couldn't. It was too stuffy in there. She found it hard to breathe. Nevertheless, she wanted to be like the others. Oh, how she wanted to be. She decided on a compromise. She'd sleep with her body inside, but her head outside. Yes, this was splendid. Her body was warm, but her face was nice and cool. She smelled pine. She could see the stars. Just as she was sliding into her first sleep, however, she came suddenly awake. She saw a pair of burning eyes, and a foul smell enveloped her. She knew that something was about to eat her face off. Swift as a lizard, darting between rocks and under the shadow of a hawk, Atalanta slid into the cave and nestled close to the huge, hot, throbbing body of her mother and realized that her idea had no chance of working at all. She could not sleep the winter through, half inside the cave, half outside, because by spring only the inside part would be left. The rest gnawed down to nothingness. At dawn, she slipped outside again, raced down the hill, and dived into the surf. She entered color, was in a cauldron of pink and blue and purple and gold. Oh, the sea was very cold, but the colors seemed to keep her warm. When she came out, her teeth were chattering. She raced along the beach as fast as she could until the sun had climbed a bit and she was warm again, and then walking slowly along the beach, watching the sea change, watching it lose its hot colors, become a tilted jade saucer. She kept wondering what to do, since hibernation didn't work. How else could she try to become more like the other bears? How else was she different besides being smooth-skinned? And an idea flared. The answer to her question lay in the question itself. For nothing troubled her brothers and sisters, or full-grown bears either. They did not ask themselves questions. They were what they were happy to be what they were, and nothing else. Nor did deer and fox and fish or wolf or python ask themselves questions. To be more like them, Atalanta would simply have to stop tormenting herself with questions, stop challenging her own existence. At noon, when the sun rode high, she ran into the surf again. Swimming underwater, she could not see that a small fishing boat had darted out from behind a jutting rock and was casting a dragnet. She was pleased because she knew she had swum farther underwater than she ever had before, but now she needed to breathe. Shooting up toward the surface, she swam right into the net. No, she didn't swim into a net. She swam into a net, yeah. Her weight made the mouth of the net close. The fisherman felt his net sagging and pulled it in swiftly, and was amazed to see what he had caught. And then he shouted with joy, for he thought that he had caught a young nereid. And the legend among fisher folk was that anyone who landed a young sea nymph was able to keep her for a year and would be insured a rich crop of fish for the rest of his life. And he amused himself and thought, perhaps I'll name her Annette. Chapter 4. Gain, Loss, and Revenge. Satisfied with his morning's catch, the fisherman sailed for home. The child lay in the bottom of the boat, still wrapped in the net. She kicked and threshed and tried to bite through the mesh, but its cords were tarry and fishy and too strong to cut with her teeth. Had it been a sculpted net instead of a mesh net, she might have had a chance. The boat sailed into a tiny harbor girded by boulders. The fisherman lifted the net out and carried it to his beach hut, which he had built out of driftwood. He carried Atalanta inside, making her more furious than ever. This was the first time she had ever been in a house, and she hated it. It seemed like a small fishy cave, even more airless than the bear's den. The man lifted the net onto a stone slab where he scaled fish. In order to deceive him, the girl had stopped struggling and lay very still. He opened the mouth of the net. She sprang out like a little demon and bit his hand savagely, clawed him with her fingers, and aimed for his eyes. He shrank back, but she slashed her nails across his face, leaving bloody furrows. She sprang off the slab and flashed toward the door. She sped down the beach toward the sea. But she heard something that stopped her mid-stride. It was his voice, calling. It was like nothing she'd ever heard, not like bird call or wolf howl or the grumbling summons of Mother Bear. Those sounds are easy, very simple. Come, hunt, eat, flee. No. The voice of this bitten man held meaning behind its sounds and meaning behind its meaning. It was speech, human speech, cleaving its way through her hard head bone to the very center of her thoughts, identifying her, creating a magical response, binding her to the very spot. She turned and waited as the man slogged slowly through the sand. She waited until he came to her. She kept staring at him as he knelt on the beach and stroked her hair with his bleeding hand. She watched his lips move, as if listening with her eyes. She had never heard words before, but half understood them as he spoke. Do not run away from me, little sea nymph. Stay with me. I'll be very good to you. I live here alone, all alone. I have no children. My wife was swept overboard in a storm and drowned. So was our child. You, little sea nymph, shall be my child, and I shall love you like a daughter. You shall be my little Nereid daughter, full of strange powers. You shall go fishing with me. My nets will always be full, and after a year you may leave me again if you wish, but I shall love you all my life long. And so Atalanta dwelt with the fishermen through that year, through that winter. She did not miss her bear family. They were asleep in her cave, and she wouldn't have been in with them anyway. She would have been living by herself in the winter hills, and the fisherman was a man very close to the earth and to the sea, attuned to the movement of animals and of fish. He knew where the mullet dwelt, and the cod, and where the lobsters fed, and what lured the octopus. He understood that only a sense of freedom would bind the wild child to him, and he allowed her to do as she pleased. Now, although he was not a man of words by any means, he knew that she craved to learn human speech, and so he spoke to her. He taught her the meaning of words, and she learned faster than he taught. By springtime, she could speak as well as he. She went fishing with him, and was a great help, for she could swim like a seal and was able to dive overboard and stay under free a tangled net. She could even catch fish in her hands and could skim across mossy, slippery rocks and catch crabs which he used for bait for octopi. She told him stories. She told him about how she had lived with bears, and he listened enraptured. But the meaning of the tales did not sink in, for he still thought she was a little Nereid child, and that the tale she was telling was some fragment of ancient undersea lore from time beyond memory, when the earth was covered by water and those he knew as land animals dwelt underwater with the fish. Wolves and bears, deer and panther and hawk. And the proof of this, he knew, was the seal, which had remained half animal even after the seas had withdrawn from the land. But fisherman and wild child were fated to part before their year was up. The robber band that had killed the shepherd who had taken care of the infant Atalanta had now split up. Former seamen, who they had decided to return to the sea, but now as our pirates, eh? But they weren't going to be very good pirates. They had stolen a ship and begun to prowl the waters. Laden ships they allowed to pass and waited till they came home, riding high in the water, for then they knew that the cargoes had been sold and their ships now carried treasure. These ships they grappled and boarded in the dark of night. Then they cut the throats of the crews, threw the bodies overboard, and helped themselves to the gold. Aye, turns out they were good pirates after all. I bet not a one of them was named George. Now, normally these pirates did not bother with fishermen, whose only wealth was their daily catch. But as it happened, they were on the lookout for a small hidden harbor where they could moor safely between voyages. They sailed into that harbor one night, slipped silently into a circle of rocks, moored there, and sneaked ashore. They moved very silently, but Atalanta, who was still unable to sleep indoors, had bedded down beyond the hut. She slept as alertly as a wild animal, and she heard something coming. Like Crash said, incoming. She sprang into the hut and shook the fisherman awake. Something's coming, she whispered. The fisherman leapt out of bed, seized his fish spear, and rushed out into the moonlight, and received an arrow full in the throat and died as he fell. The end. No. It's the end of him, but not the end of the story. The pirates rushed into the hut to see if there was anything of value inside, and one of them caught Atalanta. Now, while it was not their habit to take prisoners, they sometimes kept a healthy child to sell at a slave auction. Atalanta swept a knife from the scaling table and slashed the hand that held her, cutting its finger tendons. She wrenched herself free and darted out the door. When they chased her outside, she had vanished. Yes, she had vanished, but she did not leave. She yearned to be off this bloody beach and into the hills where her bear family would be emerging from their cave. She stayed on the beach, however, keeping herself well hidden, watching the pirates as they made themselves at home in the fisherman's hut. They enlarged the hut so they could use it as headquarters and when resting between voyages. She observed their habits. When they sailed out on a raid, they always left someone behind, for they returned at night always, and it was a duty of the one left behind to build a signal fire on moonless nights so the ship could find its way back into the tiny harbor. A plan ripened in the child's head. Like all wild animals, she could read the weather, and she waited for a day that promised a cloudy night. After the ship slipped out of the harbor, she took care to study the man left behind, for he would get his breakfast, she knew, as soon as the ship vanished from sight, and each of the men had different feeding habits. One of them liked berries for his morning meal, another preferred to catch fish and roast it on a stick, a third liked to dig up clams and eat them raw, while still another craved honeycomb. And it mattered to her which one would eat which breakfast. If it was a honey-eater, she would lie in ambush near a hollow tree where the bees hived. If it was the bear-eater, she would hide among the elderberry bushes. She knew those bushes well, for they provided her own breakfast. She had a bear's taste for berries, you see. Hiding among a fringe of trees, observing the hut, she saw a man come out carrying a bow and arrow, and she knew it was the one who liked to shoot a brace of doves for his meal. Now, she would prefer the honey-eater or the berry-eater. Still, this one was better than the one who dug clams or caught fish, for either of those she would have to stalk across an empty beach. This one, although carrying a bow with a notched arrow and alert for sound and movement, would at least have to come among the trees. She climbed a tree where the doves roosted. They flew away as she climbed, but that didn't really matter. She could imitate their morning call. She had kept the scaling knife, and she unsheathed it now. The man came among the trees, arrow notched, and she cooed like a dove. He came to the tree and looked up. It was a thick, bold oak tree. She crept around the trunk, moving silently as a squirrel, until she had come around him, back of him, and was poised just above him. She could smell a distinct smell of sardines. And then she leapt. The man beneath the tree was a huge fellow, though he smelled of sardines, and she knew that her weight would never bear him down. So she did not jump feet first. She dived upon him, knife held at arm's length, straight in front of her as she dived, and it was a knife that drove into him first, severing his spinal cord. He flopped like a fish on the ground, sardine probably, and then he was still. Now, having been killed so suddenly in the midst of such a hungry life, his wide-open eyes still seemed to be searching the tree for pigeons. Atalanta left him there. She ran down to the sea to wash the blood off her in a long, cold, cleansing swim. She ran back into the woods, found her elderberry bushes, and had a big breakfast, and went to sleep. She woke late in the afternoon. She was restless, full of boiling energy, and she had things to do before nightfall. She walked down the beach for a few miles to where the rocks formed a jagged barrier between the land and the sea, and on the beach were balks of driftwood, very heavy, but not too much for her strength. She dragged together a huge pile of logs. By the time she had finished, night had fallen, moonless night. She had wanted solid cloud cover, not a chink for a light to shine through. She ran back to the hut. She took a dry branch and thrust it into the fire that always smoldered on the hearth. Then, holding her torch high, she ran back to the woodpile. Shadows coursed after her, ran before her, and the wind-swept flame of her burning stick bent this way and that, and the dancing shadows seemed to rejoice in the vengeance that was to come. She reached a pile of driftwood and poked her lighted branch among a bunch of dry twigs at the base of the pile. Pine twigs they were, rich in tar, and the fire flared. She dragged more driftwood near in case the pirate ship had to stay out so long that she would need to feed the fire again. And then she squatted on the beach and waited. The wind was light that night, coming in puffs from different directions, but it didn't matter. The pirates always dropped sail at night and rowed into the harbor. No, it didn't matter, sail or no sail, wind or no wind. Beyond these jagged rocks, the water swirled in a ferocious riptide. Just that afternoon, she had seen huge tree trunks caught in the riptide, spinning like chips before being hurled down upon the rocks. Oh, she waited, watching the fire, trying to judge whether it was time yet to build it higher. She didn't want to build it too high, for the pirates, professionally suspicious of everything, might become alarmed by too huge a blaze. So she kept the fire as close to the sides of a normal signal fire as she could, but she didn't mind this labor. She was being eaten by impatience and fetching wood past the time. Finally, she heard what she had been waiting for, the grinding of wood upon rock, breaking timbers, men screaming. They screamed for a long time. They were all strong swimmers, she knew, but no one could last in that surf. The screams eventually died to whimpers and then stopped. But she could not leave. She waited on the beach till the sky paled, and then she heard other cries, very welcome ones, the shrieks of gulls spotting an early feast. She knew what the gulls were saying, but she had to see for herself. Nimble as a water rat, Atalanta skimmed out on the slippery rocks until she found what she was looking for, the bodies of men sprawled among the jagged boulders and fat black crabs scuttling away from the white blur of the men's faces lest they too be caught by the diving gulls. Yes, Atalanta was satisfied. Those who had killed her fishermen were dead themselves now. She turned and raced away, off the beach, through the woods, over the meadows to the foothill, and up into the mountains where the mother bear was waiting, she knew, for her return. And this year's cubs would be big enough to wrestle. Chapter 5, The Fatal Crones. Now those three dire sisters, the Fates, were busily at work. Clotho, the youngest hag, was twirling her spindle, drawing thread from flax. Lachesis, the middle sister, was measuring the thread, and 𝕄𝕠𝕟𝕠𝕟, the eldest of the fatal crones and their leader, wielded her shears, cutting the thread of life which Clotho had spun and Lachesis had measured. Every time she cut a thread, someone died. Suddenly 𝕄𝕠𝕟 shrieked. "Bah! What's the matter with you?" Lachesis screamed in alarm. "Oh, I'm bored," growled 𝕄𝕠𝕟. Bored. I'm painfully bored." "Oh, no," murmured Clotho. "Oh, yes," cried 𝕄𝕠𝕟. "Things can't go on like this. They must change." "But we are changeless," said Lachesis. We can decree change," said 𝕄𝕠𝕟, "for we are the deciders. Drop your spindle, Clotho. Lay down your measuring rod, Lachesis. Stop working, both of you, and listen to me." Now the younger hag, who had always obeyed 𝕄𝕠𝕟 and everything, put aside the spindle and rod and sat quietly. "What is so boring," said 𝕄𝕠𝕟, "is that we sit up here ordaining how everything will come out. Who will live and who and how long, who will die and how soon. And then having decided, we watch everything turn out exactly as we planned. Well, that's our duty in the high scheme of things, I guess. But I tell you that after 10,000 years of it, I am bored. Bored. I'm bored. And I've decided that even our stern routine can have a little variety, for have not the creatures called mortal have been created for our entertainment? Yes, well, let us be like the other gods and give ourselves a little sport with these humans before we kill them off. You ask me how? Ask me! The others nodded in unison, and although they had not asked anything, well, I'll tell you anyway, said 𝕄𝕠𝕟. We'll play with something I just invented and choose to call it wait. Free will. We'll decide what to do with each life as before, but sometimes we'll pick a certain destiny and put a little twist in it, you know? We'll say, you shall die young if you do this, or you shall live long unless you do that. Or the other way around. We won't do this with everyone, of course. Only the strongest mortals can handle free will. So we shall choose some strong, interesting ones and pick some choice into their destinies and watch them struggle in our net of ifs and unlesses, trying to decide what to do, and that will entertain us, will it not, sisters? Will it not? Yes, oh, yes, yes, murmured Clotho and Lachesis. That will surely entertain us. Yes, well, very well then. I'm off to Calydon. What? What? Why Calydon? Oh, you see, I've been watching a very special birth. A strong young prince has just been born, heir to the Calydonian throne, and his personality should prove interesting enough to provide us with some sport. His and his mother's too. I shall go down there now and bestow I shall bestow the treacherous gift of alternatives. Chapter 6. A prince, a hag, and two evil uncles. Now 𝘾𝕉𝕄, queen of Calydon, lay in the royal bedchamber, reaching her arms to take her newborn infant from the hands of the midwife. She expected to see something red, bald, and squalling, but this one had been born with a black shock of hair. He did not scream or whimper, but uttered a deep and chuckling sound. And then she did hear a scream, but it was the midwife, who was scuttling backwards, retreating from something that had appeared in the room without coming through the draped archway. And what the young queen saw was fearsome enough to make anyone scream, a very tall and emaciated crone. Lank white hair fell about the wedge of wrinkles that was her face, and out of that face glared two eyes, blue as the core of flame. The hag stood there, leaning upon a staff, glaring down at the royal bed, and then she raised her staff and pointed at the young woman. 𝘾𝕉𝕄, queen of Calydon, she growled. Young mother, behold. She whirled, flinging the staff into the hearth, where it immediately caught fire. You see that stick burning there? When it is consumed by the flame, your son shall die. Oh, the queen leaped from the bed with such furious speed that no one would have thought that she'd given birth just an hour before. She rushed to the hearth, stuck her hand in the flame, and pulled out a charred stick. Will my son live now? The hag laughed. Yes, you will, unless you return the stick to the fire, or someone else does. So, if I keep it safe unburned, will my son live? If! Shrieked the hag, and vanished. Now the queen had no way of knowing that she had been visited by Atropos, lady of the shears. She did know, however, that whoever the crone was, goddess or demon, she possessed an awful powers and an awful laugh, and had to be believed. 𝘾𝕉𝕄 thereupon took the charred stick and put it in a massive brass chest, and had it bound around with heavy chains, and ordered no one to open it upon pain of death. Oh, now my beautiful baby is safe, she said to herself, and shall grow into a splendid manhood and become a mighty king. She took him into her arms to feed him. Now 𝘾𝕉𝕄 had two brothers who were very wicked, ever since their sister's marriage to King 𝘾𝕼us. These men had become, well, they had been plotting to overthrow the king and seize the Calydonian throne for themselves, you see. They pretended to love their younger sister very much, and she, who had a very trusting, passionate nature, believed them and tried to love them in return, although there was something about them. Yes, there's something about them that she had never liked. But she blamed herself for this, and she tried harder than ever to care for them as much as they said they cared for her. They felt hopeful about their chances of seizing power because they knew they could manipulate the queen. They also thought that their royal brother-in-law would be easy to undermine because he was more interested in the hunt than in ruling. But they were furious when the prince was born, for their favorite oracle had warned them that this infant, if allowed to live, would grow up to be a mighty warrior. The brothers, whose names were Plexippus and Lampon, always met in a certain secret grove when they were plotting. They were extremely suspicious, both of them, and always feared that servants were trying to eavesdrop. Well, the course is clear, isn't it? Said Plexippus. We must see to it that this pesky nephew of ours does not grow up to be a mighty warrior. What do you mean by that? Said Lampon. You think I mean we'll have to get rid of him. But how? How? Well, we can't do much when he's in the nursery, can we? The castle is too closely guarded. We'll have to wait till he gets more active and, runs about and so forth. Then we'll have plenty of opportunities to arrange a little accident. Sounds good to me, said Lampon. Now the tiny prince, who was named Meleager, grew into a child, and his mother loved him more than ever. His father, too, was pleased with him. He was different from other children. As soon as he could talk, he demanded weapons, declared his love for dogs and horses, and insisted that his father take him hunting, or he would run away and hunt by himself. Now the king was delighted to humor his only son. He ordered his smith to make a tiny little spear and a bow that shot arrows no larger than darts. These were not toys, though. They were weapons. Meleager practiced spear handling and archery for hours each day and became very expert. The evil uncles had been waiting more or less patiently all this while. But now Plexippus thought it was time to strike. He summoned his brother to the grove. Well, Lampon, the time has come to move against that little brat. No doubt you've been spending the years since his birth and planning some brilliant stroke. No, I haven't, said Lampon. I leave the planning to you. All of it? Yep, every bit. Why? Well, you're smarter than me. Then what is your contribution to our effort? Asked Plexippus. Me? I'm braver. And for what we want to do, we'll need brains and guts. Sir, me as much as you. So let's hear your plan. I know you have one. Yes, I do. Fortunately for us, the foolish king spoils his son in every way possible and actually allows him to go hunting with the court. He has his own pony. I want a pony. His own dogs. His own special little weapons. Disgusting spectacle. But it serves our purpose. Do you know that dog I just imported from Africa, the Simba hound? You call that murderous beast a dog? Cried Lampon. It looks more like a cross between a wolf and a lion. Well, they use them to hunt lions down there. You better get rid of him. We won't have any servants left. He's already killed one dog handler and bit the arm off another. Yes, laughed Plexippus. Good practice, that is. Now we'll provide him with a royal feast. What do you mean? We'll starve him for a few days first, then turn him loose in the king's kennels. He'll prowl about looking for something to eat. The dogs inside will smell a strange dog and begin to howl and make a mighty clamor. And Meleager, who meddles in all kennel matters, will run out to see what's happening. He fancies he can handle any animal, you know. I've heard him bragging about it. His parents boasting, too. So he'll come out to see this strange, impressive-looking dog and decide it's something he wants for his pack. And he'll go up to it, and our hungry Simba hound will do the rest. Should be able to finish him off in 2 bites. Oh, and I suppose you're expecting me to let that damned brute out of his pen and lead him all the way to the castle, is that right? Why, yes. Now's the time to show that some of that bravery you were talking about. I've done the thinking. The next part's up to you. None of our dog handlers will go near him, none of our slaves. They say they'd rather be flogged to death than eaten alive. So now, it's up to you. You should be all right if you wear a full suit of armor. Even a Simba hound can't bite through brass. Oh, well, I'm going to try to develop some brains, said Lampon. It's getting too dangerous to be brave. And so concludes part 1 of the Calydonian Boar.